People often speak about the weight of time as though it can be measured by a calendar, but for me, 18 years was never simply a number. It was the very foundation of my life. My name is Julian, and for nearly 2 decades, I lived in a world where my wife, Sarah, was my guiding star. We met when we were barely adults, two hopeful kids with wide eyes and a shared dream of a future that felt destined. Our marriage wasn't merely a legal agreement, it was a masterpiece we created together, one careful brushstroke at a time. We had the house with the porch, the dog sleeping at the foot of our bed, and a language made up of inside jokes only we understood. I believed we were the exception to every warning about the fragility of modern love. I truly believed we were untouchable. But the problem with placing something on a pedestal is that you never notice the cracks until the structure begins to lean. Looking back, that perfection was a disguise, a beautiful veil that blinded me to the slow unraveling of the woman I thought I knew. The change didn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It came more like a long, bitter winter. Sarah slowly retreated into a private world where I no longer had an invitation. It started with small things, the way she tilted her phone screen away whenever I entered the room, or how her laughter sounded forced when I tried to make her smile. Then came the work retreats and late-night meetings that seemed to multiply with every passing month. Whenever I asked about the growing distance between us, she never became angry. She did something far worse. She made me question my own sanity. With exhausted patience, she would sigh and tell me my insecurity was becoming a burden. She insisted she was working hard for our future and claimed my concerns were an insult to her commitment. I felt like a ghost wandering through my own home, passing by a woman who looked like my wife but spoke with cold and calculated precision. I chose to believe her lies because the alternative, that the person I had built my life around was deliberately hurting me, was a reality I wasn't strong enough to face. The truth finally arrived on a Tuesday disguised as a simple notification. Sarah was in the shower and her phone rested on the nightstand, vibrating softly. I wasn't trying to look, but the name that appeared wasn't a coworker. It was someone I didn't recognize attached to a message that read, "I can still smell you on my sheets." My heart didn't simply break. It felt as if it had been ripped from my chest. I picked up the phone. Using the code I had known for years, I unlocked it and stepped into a digital graveyard where our marriage had already been buried months earlier. The messages documented every betrayal. They overflowed with a passion she hadn't shown me in years. Even worse, they told a story where I was the villain, the boring husband she felt trapped beside. When she walked out of the bathroom, steam still clinging to her skin, she immediately saw me holding the evidence. There was no denial, no excuse, no desperate explanation, only a terrifying, hollow silence. In that moment, the woman I loved disappeared, replaced by someone who looked at me with a mixture of pity and irritation. The months after the divorce felt like a descent into a very specific kind of hell. I moved into a small apartment that smelled of fresh paint and loneliness. I had to relearn how to exist in a space that no longer carried her presence. The silence felt heavy, pressing against my ears until I thought I might break beneath it. For weeks, I questioned my own worth. I wondered what I lacked. I wondered why I wasn't enough. I wondered what she found elsewhere that she couldn't find with me. But eventually, the grief transformed into something quieter and stronger. Resolve. I began showing up for myself because nobody else was going to do it for me. I went to therapy and carefully unraveled the unhealthy patterns that had shaped our relationship. I started lifting weights, not because I cared about appearance, but because I wanted to feel stronger. I wanted to experience the feeling of carrying a heavy burden without collapsing beneath it. I traveled alone. I sat at tables by myself. I discovered that my own company wasn't a consolation prize. It was enough. Piece by piece, I rebuilt myself from the wreckage. For the first time in my life, I wasn't doing it for a partner. I was doing it for the man staring back at me in the mirror. Eventually, I realized something important. My worth had never been connected to her loyalty. It was a part of my soul she never had the power to take away. Exactly 1 year after the divorce papers were finalized, Sarah appeared at my door. She looked worn and tired, the vibrant spark she once carried dimmed by the reality of the life she had chosen. She told me the other man had moved on. She admitted she had made a mistake. She said she wanted to come home. She spoke about our 18 years together as though they were a debt I still owed her. I looked at her, and the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance, a calm separation. I told her the man who loved her had died the night I read those messages. I explained that forgiveness was something I chose for my own peace, but reconciliation was a bridge that had already burned beyond repair. She cried. She begged for the version of me who used to bend and give in. But that man no longer existed. I stepped back, gently closed the door, and realized something profound. My life wasn't empty. It was finally mine. I was no longer a victim of her decisions. I had become the architect of my own future. I walked into my quiet living room, took a deep breath, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. I felt light. I felt free. I was finally home. The silence was no longer a burden to endure. It had become a sanctuary I had earned through pain, growth, and survival. I sat beside the window, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon, and I understood that the scars I carried were not symbols of weakness. They were proof that I had endured the storm and survived.